BYU and Baylor are quite familiar with one another, having played in the recent past, but this will be the first time both of them do it formally as members of the Big 12 Conference. What to expect when these two meet on the field in Waco? We're catching up with Cam Stewart of Locked On Baylor next.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up, everybody? I'm Jake Hatch, your host here on Locked On Cougars, resident BYU insider. Thank you for making Locked On Cougars and Locked On Baylor your first listen of the day. Appreciate all of you who like to call everydayers right here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Cam Stewart from Locked On Baylor joins me. And Cam, I want to start off today's crossover edition by asking you this. Are BYU and Baylor still simpatico in terms of being religiously affiliated universities, even when they go head-to-head on the football field?
I think so, yes. Jake, I'm going to say yes. And I know this is, I guess, a tired trope, but one that I'm sure BYU fans still love is like, there's no more gracious host nor visitors to our stadium than BYU. In fact, on our radio show today, we talked with the BYU Cougars Cares Alumni Association, I think is what it's called. And they have a chapter down in Austin. They are doing a food drive at University High School in Waco Saturday morning to benefit the biggest food pantry in Central Texas. So like, how can I be mad at that? How can I be mad at that? Look, we could both laugh at the Pac-12 for the same reason, because we know they wouldn't have accepted us. And here we are living it together. We're going to have a fun day on Saturday. And I have a question to throw back at you, Jake, before we really get going in this thing. Can I get a rating on the 5-layer, the beefy burrito?
Let's just put it this way. I've had a hankering for them all week long, and I've eaten a couple. So, hey, they've been treating me pretty well, all things considered.
All right. I'll take that as a positive. And I should also ask, because I'm trying to check my sources for our program the same, but has anybody at BYU played 3 games, hasn't got enough money, and is entering the portal as a redshirt?
No, not yet.
Okay. All right. That's good. No offseason holdouts.
BYU had that happen to them actually a couple of seasons ago. They had a tight end by the name of Dallin Holker who 4 games into the season, all of a sudden up and left, ended up at Colorado State of all places. So it's happened to BYU, but this season, to my knowledge, nobody's holding out. I'm assuming Baylor is in the clear as well.
As far as I know, and we're both through 4 games, so that takes out a lot of the talent.
Yep.
So far, so good. But there's a starting quarterback who got hurt and might not be the starting quarterback anymore, who's only played 2 games. I'm just saying. I hope that doesn't happen, but there's something to monitor.
That's actually a good place to start in terms of this game. Sawyer Robertson looks like he's in line to start once again for Baylor here. Now, Daquan Finn was a high-profile acquisition via the transfer portal for the Bears. Now that Sawyer's the starter, what has changed for this team offensively as BYU gets ready to head to Waco?
Less RPO. Sawyer's a big body, and he can run. By the way, he just ran for a 45-yard touchdown against Colorado on Saturday. So it's like he can run, but Daquan Finn is just, like Hot Wheels, brother. He is really dangerous when he gets in space. Sawyer Robertson, not necessarily the same way, but more comfortable as a pocket passer, at least from what we've seen this year. He loves a good zone defense and going against those. He is calm in the pocket. Not like crazy good arm strength, but he can thread it a little bit. He had 2 touchdown passes of more than 30 yards against Colorado, which might not seem like much for some teams, but for Baylor's quarterback struggles the last few years, and even when it was good with BYU backup Gary Bohannon, he wasn't throwing it 45, 50-yard touchdown passes. So I think the Baylor fans, and myself included in that, have really liked the poise of Sawyer Robertson, and that probably takes out Daquan Finn as the starter. I wouldn't be surprised to see him in some packages, which I think would be crucial for Baylor. I think that would be a really good direction to go, even for a guy who's still kind of working his way back into health. But we did that season preview, Jake, and I was like, the storylines, the narratives in my head of Gary Bohannon coming back and having a big game at Baylor doesn't look like it's going to play out.
Well, and that's the thing about it is there was a strong push by Gary during training camp where there was about the midway point of camp, rumors coming out of training camp were that, hey, Gary's pushing for this, and he may be QB1. Now Jake Retzlaff responded in a very positive fashion and took the job away from him in the final couple of weeks leading up to the season. And Jake's been a very capable quarterback for BYU, and he had the turnover issues early on the season. I think that soured a lot of BYU fans, but the last 2 games in particular, you can tell he's made a concerted effort to avoid those catastrophic mistakes. It was the thing that kind of marred last season for him. Very few BYU fans will ever forget that 100-yard pick six against Oklahoma at home. And it's kind of been held against them, even though it's literally almost a year ago that happened. But the thing is, he has been much better, I think, against Kansas State. He had probably, I believe, his most impressive throw of the season. It was a cover 2 zone beater that very few quarterbacks can complete that pass between the cornerback and the safety. And he hit Chase Roberts on the money for a touchdown. It showed that he's got legitimate arm strength that can attack all angles of the field. But more importantly, he's starting to finally fully grasp what the BYU offense, I think, requires of him. And that's kind of the interesting part about this is we were wondering how long it would take him if he could take that next step. It appears he's finally taken it.
And you gave him the mulligan, right? You gave him a mulligan earlier in the season, and so far so good. BYU obviously 4-0, and it seems like this is what I find really interesting. I know the meatheads, the talking heads, they love a good quarterback discussion no matter what. And both these teams, I think, can hang their hat defensively, and we'll get to that, I'm sure. But I look at this as a fascinating quarterback matchup because they're both guys. Now, obviously, Retzlaff has started more than Sawyer Robertson, but both got starts last year. Both come into this year in a quarterback battle. And it seems like they're kind of in the same place. You know, Sawyer Robertson, while has looked good, it's not like he's put up crazy numbers. And I would say Retzlaff the same thing, even with the big victory against Kansas State. They're both teams that are struggling to kind of establish the run the way they want to. And it feels like their quarterbacks are kind of in the same point of ascension of like, man, we like this. When's the breakout game? Like, when's the true breakout game where you go and win a game because your quarterback is really commanding the offense? And I find that to be very fascinating in this matchup of, is this the week the dam is going to break for one of these guys?
Well, and that's a great question, because I was going to pose a similar type question to you on that front, because as you mentioned, both of these guys have had to carry the team at points. I look back at the Baylor Colorado game. Sawyer Robertson had them right there in this. Now, some defensive woes down the stretch seemed to them in, and we can delve into that a little bit later on. But it's I think you're right. One of these two is going to, I think, have to put their team, quote unquote, on their back. I don't think either of these teams in terms of their rushing attack have been stellar to this point of the season. And that's obviously a big crutch, I think, for a lot of quarterbacks, is to have a good running game to rely on. Both of these guys, and I'll get your thought on this, have had to essentially at times put the team on their back. But you really want to see them, as you mentioned, seize hold and say, no, guys, really get on my back. I'm carrying you to the finish here.
Yeah, that's something we're waiting on here. And I think the good news for Baylor fans is there's enough positives to take from this season in that Colorado game in particular, even though they gave up 31 points in regulation, that there's a defense there that they didn't have last year. So there's not going to be such a huge onus every time the offense takes the field of like, got to score now, got to pass every down. That's the way they were in so much of that season last year at 3-9. But it will obviously, that's what needs to take a team to the next level. And when you're looking at it, whether it's a 4-0 BYU or a 2-2 Baylor, they're both looking to bounce back from losing seasons. They both need to make it to, or take it to that next level. And that's what it is. The college game ain't what it used to be even like 10 years ago in that sense, where the NFL has been ahead of it, of like, if you don't have the quarterback, you don't have it. And it doesn't need to be flawless, but I think both teams think both these quarterbacks need to level it up a little bit. And like you say, kind of backpack a little bit and win you a game or two in order to really be like that feared team.
Now, you referred to defense. We're going to delve into that coming up next, because I think both of these teams, the defense has had question marks, major question marks this season ago, and have made progress. We'll delve into that as we roll on momentarily right here on a crossover edition of Locked On Cougars and Locked On Baylor. Today's show is brought to you by our friends over at FanDuel. Now, FanDuel is here for you guys, no matter what you're into with regards to your sports betting needs. Of course, all NFL fans watching games right now, they got a really fun way to start the season with a big return on FanDuel because they are America's #1 sports book. When you get the hunch in the middle of a game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and also do so much more on the same page where you place your bets. The app, it's super simple and easy to use. If you want to get in on the action with our friends over at FanDuel, download the app today. But more importantly, you can get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. $5 bet, you can place it on BYU or Baylor in the matchup coming up this weekend. You want futures odds on either one of the Bears or the Cougars in basketball. No matter what you're into, $5 bet, you get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. It's all courtesy of your friends over at FanDuel. So get started today by visiting them at FanDuel.com. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars and Locked On Baylor your first view or listen of the day. Jake Hatch, Cam Stewart along for the ride here. Now, Cam, you talked about the fact that Baylor gave up 31 points against Colorado, and had they, had their head on their shoulders on a certain final play of regulation, they very well escape Boulder with a win and only give up the 24 points in regulation. I want to get your thought on this. Dave Aranda has obviously been under the gun. He had a 3-9 season a year ago, and a lot of people think he's coaching for his job right now. But I tend to agree with you. It seems like Baylor's had a little bit of a resurgence defensively. Is that because Dave has finally put his hands back on this defense and he's calling it once again?
I think so. Yeah, and they've brought in a couple of big-time guys through the transfer portal. Keaton Thomas at linebacker, Steve Linton as defensive end, who actually had the most pressures on any quarterback over the weekend. According to PFF, he had 9 QB pressures in that game and a couple of sacks. And I'll even go one step further with that, Jake, of really Monday morning quarterbacking this defense. Because, yeah, it's a Hail Mary, brings them to 24, and there was a play right before the half where Colorado had a big touchdown. It was like 55, 60 yards where it went to review. I think they got the call wrong. I think the guy's knee was down, which would have had him down at about the 40, 45. And he ends up running it for a touchdown. I thought he was down, and there was a definite block in the back by Jimmy Horn right after he got up. I don't know how that was missed. And so look, at the end of the day, of course, they lost. But if you look at those, then it's a 17-point game. Like, that's a very real possibility. One's right before that. I mean, both right before the ends of the half. So you have a real possibility of taking those away and making it 17 points against Shedeur Sanders and Travis Hunter. And that's a really good performance. And so it ends up being 38, and you're like, how can you say that was a good defensive performance? But it could have been 17 just as easily, and they had 8 quarterback sacks and coulda, woulda, shoulda. They should have had some more. They should have had 12 or 14 in that game, and they brought pressure all night, and for the first time in like almost 3 years, they looked like a team that could really get after the quarterback. And I think just from a personnel standpoint, it is better, and their game plans are better. They don't look like they're not ready to play. They don't look like they just can't stop the first 15 plays, the scripted plays from another offensive coordinator. And Dave's the only defensive play caller head coach in the entire country. But I think, yes, that has worked out big time. And that's why I think, honestly, I think we're going to see a slugfest on Saturday.
Well, and that's the thing about this. BYU, and a lot of Cougar fans will point to this, has given up exactly 3 touchdowns defensively so far this season. And funny enough, they have come against the FCS opponent and their G5 opponent. The 2 Power 4 opponents they've played, both SMU and Kansas State, have mustered between them 8 field goals. And this is a BYU defense. If you look at the metrics a season ago, Cam, we're talking sub 100 in almost every category. They were dead last in terms of Power 4 teams in sacks a season ago. They had 11 in 12 games a year ago. They're already at 6 on the season, if I recall correctly, if my math's correct. So they're already more than halfway to last season's mark. And it's been quite remarkable to see what Jay Hill, as BYU's defensive coordinator, has done. Now, that has kind of raised the concern that if he continues to field such a stellar defense, he could be a hot head coaching candidate.
Yeah.
That's why he took the leap coming from Weber State to join BYU, because he wants to take that next step and become a head coach at the Power 4 level. So you're right. This could be a slugfest. You look at the metrics on these two teams. It could be, funny enough, a game unlike the one 3 years ago in Waco, where it was more of kind of an offensive onslaught, particularly Baylor's side. This could be a game where it ends up both teams potentially in the 20s.
Yeah, and I remember a certain wide receiver going off the last time these two teams played in Waco. Once the IR stint is over, you'll see him playing for the Rams.
Yeah.
But the thing too with I like what you mentioned there about not giving up the touchdowns, because I neglected to mention that those points in the second half by Colorado were the only points that Baylor's let up in the second half this year. And again, I'm going to take away those two plays, the Hail Mary and the touchdown before the half, to point out that neither of these teams give up big plays.
No.
And that's really, like, especially in the college game, that's a big deal. Like that separates, if you give up big plays, because I'm trying to think of how to word this. It separates bad defense from good defense, but like it's a non-starter if you give up explosive plays. You can't be a good defense that gives up explosive plays. You can be a bad defense that doesn't give them up, but you got to start there, right? And so that's why this game, limited possessions, I think, even though neither team runs the ball the way they want to. And by the way, the two worst rushing offenses in the conference last year, lest we forget. So both are trying to make strides to get out of the basement there. But still, because, these defenses at worst are just going to make you take time off the clock to score. Yep. That's what really points it out to me, because I wouldn't say either of these teams are like super ball hockey. They're not drawing a ton of turnovers. They're in the middle of the pack with penalties. So it's not like they're super clean, but then again, coverage has been great downfield. They take away explosive plays. And I know that was something that we were both kind of smarting over last year, just like every game, of like, oh, yeah, broken Tain again. Or, oh, yeah, that guy's behind the defense. Safety bit on that one. And so just taking those away, like, that's a good starter towards getting a really good defense anyway.
Well, and you make a very good point. Neither of these teams are playing quarters defense and dropping 8 every time. That's the thing about this. Both of them have been attacked this year. You mentioned the 8 sacks that Baylor had against Colorado. The way that Colorado's offensive line protects, you could go for double digits on a good day, it feels like.
And like, so good that they decided to go for a sack on a Hail Mary attempt. Like, that's how much they trust their defensive line. I'm going to take that as a positive right now, Jake. That's how confident we all are in this pass rush.
Spin it. I like that. I like the spin cycle on that. No, but you're right. Here's the deal is that it's going to be interesting to see how these teams attack. BYU turned that game against Kansas State because of the turnovers they forced. Jack Kelly strips a ball out. It's a scoop and score for Tommy Prassis. 3 plays later, they pick off Avery Johnson. 2 plays later, it's a touchdown. Coming out of the second half, another interception, 2 plays later, touchdown, and that game's over at that point. It was absolutely remarkable how quickly it turned around. But you're right. The metrics say that these are 2 teams. They're kind of in a mold where they are getting better week by week. But compared to what they were a season ago, it's actually remarkable how good both have been.
Yeah, and I think that's something that's getting lost in the fold here, if I can defend Baylor's 2-2 record for a second. And that's a game they should have won against Colorado. Like, I'm not taking away from that. They should be 3-1. There's no excuse to lose that game, and they lost it. But as I've kind of said, on kind of a positive spin of this, when you're 3-9, like, that's bad. Like, that's bottoming out for a lot of teams, and hopefully that's bottoming out for Baylor. Most teams take years to come back from that. Yeah. And we have been spoiled in a way in our 2 bad seasons in the last decade. It turned around right away. 1-11 in 2017. They go 7-6 the next year. And then the next year after that, they're in the Big 12 championship game. 2020. 2-7 in the COVID season. The next year, the most wins in Baylor football history in a single season. So, like, that's not normal, though. And when you have a quarterback, a coach that's on the hot seat, you expect to, like, win right away. And again, that was a winnable game on Saturday, but to get to 6 wins, which is what we're all hoping for right now, and that's like the standard to keep Dave Aranda's job, that's a big step up, doubling your win total from the year before. And so, like, that's another reason why BYU should be riding high right now at 4-0. It's not easy to do right away, and you've got to, like, knock that culture out of them of, hey, last year's done. We can't fall into the bad habits we did last year. And so, yeah, 2-3 after this weekend, if that's the case, would be a disappointment in some extent, because you looked at it 2 weeks ago and thought, hey, we could be 4-1 by the end of September. But you got to pick away at these things. It's really tough to go from 2 wins to 12 just like that. That's why it had such attention around it in 2021. It just doesn't happen a lot. So both these teams, man, like it's a turnaround and it's a grind to get back to 6 wins.
Yeah. All right. Now we're going to try to make heads and tails of the fact that BYU, who is nationally ranked this week at 22, is actually an underdog going to Baylor. We'll try to make heads and tails of that. We'll also get some final thoughts and predictions of what we expect from the game as we roll on right here on a crossover edition of Locked On Cougars and Locked On Baylor. Today's show is brought to you by our friends, a new friend, I guess an old friend back with us now, is our friends over at Prize Picks. Now, Prize Picks is here for you guys. They are America's #1 daily fantasy sports app with over 5 million active users. The best part is the easiest and most exciting way to play daily fantasy sports. All you do is pick more or less on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. It's as simple as that, everybody. One Caleb Williams passing yard will get you 1 win on Prize Picks every week in September. That's right. Only 1 yard from the #1 overall pick will get you automatic win every football weekend in September. That's 4 free weeks of W's. Take advantage of it today with our friends over at Prize Picks. Also, is the best way to get in on the action in most states, including California, Texas, and Georgia. So take advantage today. All you got to do is go online, as I mentioned, pick 2 to 6 players and pick simply over or under on their stat projections. It's as simple as it goes. Tyreek Hill for more than 90 receiving yards, Dak Prescott for more than 263 passing yards. Then they go over or under. Pick it, lock it in. It's as simple as that. So download the Prize Picks app today and use the promo code LOCKEDONCollege and get $50 instantly when you pay $5. That's promo code LOCKEDONCollege on Prize Picks. Get $50 instantly when you play just $5 with our friends at Prize Picks. You don't even need to win, to receive that $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. It's all courtesy of Prize Picks, where you can run your game. Thank you once again for making Locked On Cougars and Locked On Baylor your first view or listen of the day. Rolling on here with Cam Stewart from Locked On Baylor as we wrap up this crossover edition. Now, BYU entered the national rankings after the upset win against Kansas State, and I've seen a little bit of chatter online, Cam, that some BYU fans are a little bit miffed. Well, we're nationally ranked. Why are we the underdogs going to Baylor? Well, I'm going to share my piece on this, and I'll get your thought on it in a moment. I look at it as BYU, I think, in many of the odds makers' eyes, has skated through to get to 4-0 in some lucky fashion in their eyes. And they're still expecting a regression to the mean, because I think any BYU fan going into the season after 4 games, 2-2, similar to what Baylor is right now, is what BYU fans probably have projected. We talked all off season long, much like you did, that 6-6 needed to be the bar for success for BYU after a 5-7 season a year ago. Well, they're 4-0, and it looks like they're going to pass their over-under win total of 4.5 with flying colors. But I still think that you look at it, and there's odds makers out there say, you know what? There's still some flaws in BYU's game, and that's why Baylor on their home turf is going to be a slight favorite.
Yeah, I'm still confused by it, Jake. I am. I really am. And by the way, I couldn't find that ranking on the AP website. I don't know if you saw that. It went literally from 21 to 23. This was complete LDS erasure by the AP. Like, I don't know where that came from. I was like, I for sure thought I was just like looking at the logos. I'm like, they're definitely 22. Like I just saw that. Not there. Yeah. So I am confused, though, in a way. I know what you're saying here. And I think part of it is like they're still trying to make out what both of these teams are. Mm-hmm. And if for some reason that blowout win against Kansas State wasn't enough, I guess that they think that's just enough respect to the LaVell Edwards Stadium atmosphere or something. I don't know. I get that it feels like one of those cases, and you see it every year, where the committee doesn't really know what to make of the team yet, but they're 4-0. You can't not rank them. You just beat a ranked team. You can't not rank them. And then they go on the road, which McLean Stadium has not been a tough place to play for visitors recently, but maybe, just maybe, they're looking at the stat that you put into your show yesterday of the day games. Maybe they're like, it's a day game. BYU against an FBS team in the daytime. Boy, I think they're really going to hate that sun, and they just make Baylor the favorite. Or maybe they think Baylor's really, PO'd, and they think, okay, this team is going to wake up and take BYU as their next victim. I don't know, but I'm not saying that this is an unwinnable game for Baylor by any means, but I was surprised to see that line. I was really surprised to see it, and hasn't really moved much.
No.
It's Baylor's still the favorite as we're recording.
Yeah, it's like a half point is what's moved either way, and that means the bets have been pretty steady in terms of just staying right where it's at. Now, I want to get your thought on this. Who are the 2 or 3 players you think are most critical? If Baylor wants to win this game, who are the 2 or 3 players that are most critical to that effort for the Bears?
Well, I'm gonna go low hanging fruit, quarterback.
Sure.
Sawyer Robertson. Because maybe this is the game that he puts them on his back, and like we were talking about earlier, and he wins a game for them. But I also really like the way he works against zone coverages, and the fact that you can not even necessarily dink and dunk, but get down the field by throwing to soft spots in the zone. I think Sawyer's got good touch on it, and I think he can do that most of the day. And he's one of those quarterbacks who's not going to get frazzled by the fact that he can't get a big play through the air. And there's still some quarterbacks out there that is the case for. So I think Sawyer Robertson, I have to say Keaton Thomas on the other side. He's been my defensive MVP for Baylor so far, the transfer from JUCO and originally from West Virginia. I just think he reads the game incredibly well, just so well. And he's good in coverage too. So he's one of those linebackers that are going away in the college game in terms of you don't ever have to take them off the field. And I love the way, and he's just as smart against the pass and in coverage as he is against the run and identifying what the play is. So as is any case with Baylor's defense, if he has a good game, Baylor has a good game. And my final one is going to be Michael Trigg, the tight end. Now, I don't have any special reason as to why a tight end is a big time matchup in this game, but I have said it time and again. He's another transfer, by the way, as well. So 3 transfers in the last 2 years that I've mentioned on this list. Michael Trigg is a matchup nightmare at tight end. He is basically a tall slot receiver that can line up at tight end and line up a lot in the slot. I think he's a big time difference maker in the passing game. And he wasn't really a factor for Baylor in that game against Colorado. If he has a big game, it's tough for Baylor to lose and almost anyone you're going up against. So those are the 3 I'm looking at, Jake. Well, I just want to throw it over to you.
Okay, so I'm similar to you. Obviously, Jake Retzlaff's got to shine. You got to have a quarterback play that's going to lift BYU because they've got questions at running back. Sione Moa, who was a standout, obviously, in the game against Kansas State, kind of broke out in that game. Well, he was spotted on campus this week with a boot on his foot, and the coach has said he's going to be they're going to have to make a decision late in the week if he's able to go. So with questions around your running back position, speaking of BYU, Jake Retzlaff's got to show out. I'm going to take some liberty and say the tandem at wide receiver of Chase Roberts and Darius Lassiter, they have got to show up big time. They have been the best 2 receivers on BYU's roster. They have bailed Jake out in multiple instances this season. They both have got to show out in this game for the Cougars to have a chance, it feels like, to win on the road because they have been sure-handed. They're big body receivers, and they've got some speed to them as well. So they're going to have to take advantage of what they can do against the Baylor defense. And you mentioned a linebacker, a transfer. Well, BYU's got one of those of their own. Jack Kelly, Weber State transfer. I invoked the name Kyle Van Noy from BYU of yesteryear when you look at him because he's that type of a player. He's able to rush the passer. He's an elite pass rusher. He was a guy who forced that strip last week. They got the scoop and score for BYU. We've seen him already pop up on NFL draft boards. Mel Kiper has got him kind of middle of his outside linebacker pack when he said that coming into the season, he was completely off Kiper's radar. He's got closing speed. He's got great size for the position. And if he has the same type of impact he's had in the 4 games up to this point, BYU's defensive effort's going to be very, very capable against the Baylor Bears.
By the way, big shout out to Kyle Van Noy. Man, he's still doing it. He is still playing at a high level. Had a big game against the Cowboys the other day. I'm a fan of his post BYU days. This is not pumping up BYU's tires more, but man, I love Kyle Van Noy and his versatility with the Patriots. And I think it's awesome that he's still doing it. Like most of you guys forgot about him 4 or 5 years ago when he stopped playing in the Super Bowl, but he might have that chance again. So big shout out to Kyle Van Noy, man. If you're going to be Kyle Van Noy, that's a hell of a career.
Yeah, no doubt. Real quick before we wrap up, you got a prediction for this one?
Oh, man. Oh, you're going to make me do this. You're going to make me do this. Oh, I think these teams match up pretty evenly for one being 2-2 and one being 4-0 coming off a very impressive win. Mm-hmm. So I think this is a game that's won in the margins, which is a term I love to use. And that edge to me goes to BYU. Like I just everything but the running game is advantage BYU. And I think quarterback's a slight advantage to Retzlaff, but I see advantage BYU. So if I had to pick it now, which you're making me, I'm going to go 23-20 Cougars.
Okay. Well, I am a similar.
And people get on me for picking Baylor too much. So now they don't have to.
They're BYU fans will love you for saying that.
Yes, and it's a huge fan base, so I'll appreciate the views. Make sure we tease it with that. Yeah,
absolutely, we can do that. Now, I'm gonna pick BYU as well, but it's a similar kind of score line to you. I've got BYU 28, Baylor 24, and I really do think this is going to be a defensive struggle. I think BYU does just enough to get by and get to 5-0 and raise expectations even higher in Provo going into a bye week. But I feel like this is an advantageous position, but it should be a fun one overall. And the best part is these two fan bases, I think they see like peers in one another.
Yeah. Yeah, and we both don't like Utah at this point. Some of us more than others, but I think that has become abundantly clear. The friendly fracas is what we threw around. It didn't catch on, but it still rings true. It's going to be a fun environment. A lot of Cougar blue, I think, at McLean Stadium. You BYU people, you're everywhere, man. I went in 2022, took a flight morning of the game from Dallas to Salt Lake, and there was like just as many BYU fans as there were on the plane as Baylor fans. So I'm excited for it. It was such a fun time the first time around in 2021. So I can't wait to have it again. And by the way, that was a very entertaining game, and I'm sure it will be this time, just for different reasons.
We'll see. Yeah. All right, Cam, where can everybody find your work?
Oh, that would be at Locked On Baylor, obviously on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts. And I sometimes put out funny tweets at Real Camp Stewart, and I will do about like 100 tweet about 100 tweets during every Baylor game. So if you're wanting to keep up with Baylor, if you're part of this friendly fracas thing, that's where you can find me. Jake, I'm going to toss it over to you for my fans on where to find you, because we do love us some BYU.
I do put out plenty of tweets myself in game. So follow me. Jacob C. Hatch is my personal Twitter handle. We're also on Twitter as well with the show. It's Locked On Cougars, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter on all three of those platforms. And as always, search out Locked On Cougars on YouTube or wherever you get your podcast. Cam, as always, it's a pleasure, man. Look forward to doing this again as soon as basketball season gets here.
Yes, and that's going to be a ton of fun too, as it was last year. Yeah, two really entertaining games.
All right. Well, for Cam, I'm Jake. A big thank you to all of you for making both Locked On Cougars and Locked On Baylor your first view and or listen of the day. Appreciate all of your guys' patronage. Make sure you make it your first listen of the day every single day. And as always, be an everydayer with us right here on the Locked On Podcast Network.